This is a film about a 33-day voyage to the famous Ross Sea in deepest Antarctica. The voyage started from Ushuaia, Argentina and ended in Bluff, New Zealand. The total distance sailed was 64,010 nautical miles, or about 12,000 kilometers. In total, it took some 36 hours of flying and waiting around at airports to get to Ushuaia. However, there were interesting sights along the way which helped pass the time. Coming into Santiago de Chile, we passed over an impressive mines-tailing dam that threatens local inhabitants. Although we were continuing on to Buenos Aires and San Diego, we were forced to get off the plane, pass through Chilean immigration before we were allowed to reboard the same plane to continue our flight to Buenos Aires. The flight over the Andes was beautiful. Unfortunately for the international traveler, Buenos Aires has separate international and domestic airports, which means that international travelers must change airports to fly to Ushuaia. The inter-airport transfer takes several hours, but on the plus side, one does get to see downtown Buenos Aires if transferring via bus. The early morning flight to Ushuaia offered some beautiful scenes due to the full moon being out and a pretty sunrise. The flight from Buenos Aires to Ushuaia covered 2,351 kilometers and lasted for 3.5 hours, but there was lots of interesting sights, including planes flying past us and the plane's Brock Inspector in the clouds. The scenery was very beautiful as we came into land at Ushuaia, which is nestled at the foot of the snow-covered Marshall Mountains. The huge cruise ships in the sunlight added to the attraction of the sea. Ushuaia is the capital of the Tierra del Fuego province, which the Argentines claim includes the Falkland Islands belonging to Britain. Ushuaia's harbor has a number of interesting boats, including the abandoned tug St. Christopher. Ushuaia proudly touts itself as the end of the world, although the Chilean town of Puerto Williams is further south. As Ushuaia claims to be the capital of the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas as they call them, there are many Falkland Islands war memorials and murals scattered around the city. During the 1982 Falkland Islands War, the Argentinian cruiser General Belgrano sailed from Ushuaia and was subsequently sunk by a British submarine. The Ushuaia naval base has seen the loss of other warships, which are memorialized as well. Ushuaia is a city of murals, many of which are well done and very colorful. The area's indigenous people, known as the Yagan, were largely wiped out following the arrival of settlers. However, their memory lives on in several murals around town. From 1896 until 1947, Ushuaia was the home to a prison, whose prisoners served as forced settlers who built many of the early buildings in the city. Apparently assisting the police was a feral dog who enjoyed chasing cars. If you find yourself in Ushuaia and are willing to be spontaneous, it is possible to get a heavily discounted last-minute Antarctic cruise. Due to its location on the Beagle Channel on the tip of South America, Ushuaia serves as the major port for tour ships heading to Antarctica. It was fascinating to watch a gull dropping mussels on the rocks in order to break the shells. Ushuaia's lifeblood is tourism, although its cruise terminal is just a pier, with space for 2 medium-sized cruise ships plus a couple of smaller ones. With some 36 Arctic-bound ships staging annually out of Ushuaia during the austral summer, plus 7 other visiting ships, Ushuaia has about 300 cruise ship visits during the austral summer. It is expensive to dock at the pier in Ushuaia, so most Arctic-bound ships just spend long enough at the pier to offload passengers, refuel and reprovision, and then onboard new passengers before they head on out back to Antarctica. The MS Expedition came into dock at the pier. We had twice voyaged to Antarctica on this ship over the years. The Aero Club Ushuaia, located on an old naval air station, is the center of sightseeing flights around the Ushuaia area. Both light aircraft and helicopters were coming and going on a regular basis. At the aerodrome is a replica of the Heinkel HD-24 seaplane named Tsingtao that German explorer Günther Pruschau used on a 1927-1928 expedition to the southern tip of South America. Unfortunately, this faithful replica was left outside and is now much damaged. The old Argentine motor torpedo boat mounted on the shore struck a very impressive pose. This Higgins-class torpedo boat was built in the United States for service in the Pacific during World War II, before being passed on to the Argentine Navy. With the departure of the Coral Princess, the MV Ortelius, our ship for our voyage to the Ross Sea, arrived to dock at the pier. MV Ortelius was built in 1989 in Poland as a research vessel for the Russian Academy of Science and was named Marina Sveteva. In 2011, she was sold and reflagged as a Dutch ship and renamed Ortelius. The ship has been fitted out as a 125-passenger vessel. Ortelius is 91 meters long, about 18 meters wide, and has a maximum draft of about 6 meters. With an ice strength rating of UL1/A1, a top speed of 13 knots, and has one diesel engine generating 4,300 horsepower. The Ortelius' ice strength rating of UL1/A1 means that she can operate in modest ice conditions consisting of solid one-year sea ice and loose multi-year pack ice without icebreaker assistance. Hence, she can safely sail through the summer sea ice routinely encountered on a voyage to the Ross Sea. With the mandatory lifeboat drill over, the final lines were cast off and we set sail from Ushuaia's pier down the Beagle Channel to the Chilean town of Porto Williams, where we would pick up 3 Chilean helicopters. These helicopters would allow us to land in inaccessible areas during our voyage. We made the short trip down the Beagle Channel to Porto Williams to rendezvous with our helicopters. The Beagle Channel was alive with seabirds, including shags, albatrosses, and Magellanic penguins. We were supposed to make a brief stop at Porto Williams to embark the 3 Chilean helicopters. However, bad weather in the mountains between Punta Arenas and Porto Williams prevented the helicopters from arriving for 36 hours. During this 36-hour delay, we watched planes, ships, and ferries coming and going. Porto Williams, Chile is a town of some 2,900 people and serves as a base for Chile to assert its sovereignty around Cape Horn and to support its Antarctic basin. Chilean officials, including a pilot, came on board whilst we waited for the helicopters. There were many seabirds nesting on a spit near Porto Williams, but unfortunately a group of people decided that they had to walk right through rather than around the nesting birds. The Yagan ferry makes the 561-kilometer voyage from Punta Arenas to Porto Williams in about 32 hours, bringing supplies to the town. The first 2 helicopters to land on board had their rotor blades removed so that they could be stowed in the hangar. The 3rd helicopter was strapped on the deck behind the hangar and wrapped up in its protective cover as we finally hoisted anchor and set sail down the Beagle Channel towards the Drake Passage. The Magellanic penguin is a medium-sized South American penguin that was named after the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, who spotted the birds in 1520. We sailed past the wreck of the MV Logos that remained stuck on the rocks that it hit in the Beagle Channel in 1988. After disembarking the Channel pilot, we headed out across the Drake Passage, which thankfully was mostly calm. The highlights of the Drake Passage crossing were the glorious sunsets and watching Cape Petrels flit about the waves alongside the ship. The Cape Petrels reveled in flying at wave-top level in the lee of the ship, dodging both the waves and the ocean spray. Nearing the coastline of the Antarctic Peninsula at sunset, we started to see huge icebergs taking on a beautiful reddish hue. The sight of the MS Silver Cloud cruise ship returning from the Antarctic Peninsula when set against the setting sun was very beautiful, but the following scene of the huge iceberg passing by at sunset was even more beautiful. In part 2, we sail south along the Antarctic Peninsula, transiting through the famous Lumiere Channel and visiting the Ukrainian Vernadsky Station. We then make an amazing Zodiac cruise amongst the whales feeding in the waters of the Argentine. In part 2, we sail south along the Antarctic Peninsula, transiting through the famous Lumiere Channel and visiting the Ukrainian Vernadsky Station. We then make an amazing Zodiac cruise amongst the whales feeding in the waters of the Argentine islands. We made landfall in Antarctica off Anvers Island with its wonderful snow-clad mountains. It was discovered by John Biscoe in 1832 during an expedition to find new sealing grounds in the Southern Ocean. Soon we were nearing the Lumiere Channel, which is one of the top tourist destinations in Antarctica. It is sometimes called Kodak Gap due to the beauty of the channel enclosed by steep glaciated peaks. The channel is 11 kilometers or 7 miles long and just 1,600 meters or a mile wide at its narrowest point. Wildlife is frequently seen in the channel as it can be ice-choked, favoring the presence of seals and penguins. However, the channel was ice-free, so we only saw penguins porpoising along. During our passage of the Lumiere Channel, a couple had arranged to exchange their wedding vows. Exiting the southern end of the Lumiere Channel, we passed by the large ship MS Midnatsal, waiting to enter the channel, as well as several foraging humpback whales. The weather was excellent, with no wind and an ocean that was almost mirror-like, making it very easy to spot whales amongst the bergy pit. As we sailed ever further southwards, the MS Midnatsal fell well astern. The ocean surface was so smooth that it acted like a mirror, and so you could see yourself in it when you looked down over the side of the ship. The Argentine Navy's Grosac Refuge, located near a Gentoo penguin colony, dates from 1955 and is named in honor of Paul Grosac, a French writer who authored a plea supporting the Argentines' claim to the British Falkland Islands. As we headed deeper south, this was our last chance to see the beautiful Cape Petrels. We passed by an ever-changing display of icebergs, including those with deep grooves in their surface, a telltale sign that they had rolled over, exposing what had previously been underwater. We stood off Galindez Island in the Argentine islands in order to visit the Vernadsky Research Base. Vernadsky is a Ukrainian Antarctic research station named after the Russian and Ukrainian mineralogist Vladimir Vernadsky, who was the first president of the National Academy of Sciences of the Ukraine. Before being handed over to the Ukraine in 1996 and renamed as Vernadsky, the research base was a British research base named Faraday Station. The Ukraine took over the operation of the base and its research program after the UK sold it for a symbolic £1. With the Zodiacs in the water, we were soon off for a visit to the station. As Vernadsky is co-located with the Gentoo penguin colony, we were greeted at the landing site by a group of Gentoos.
I'm going to nose the boat in, and like I said, everyone stays seated, and you're going to sit down on the right.
Penguins frequently seem hesitant to enter the ocean, but once in the water, they are amazing swimmers that appear to fly along. We were lucky to have visited Vernadsky before the widespread nature of COVID-19 became evident. The voyage following ours was unable to visit any Antarctic bases due to COVID-19 concerns. Vernadsky Station is staffed by 24 Ukrainians in the summer and 12 over the winter. The main building has a very homey atmosphere. As one of the longest operating bases in Antarctica, Vernadsky Station has conducted scientific research studies on long-term temperature trends, concluding that Vernadsky is experiencing a significant warming trend of about 0.6 degrees centigrade or 1.1 degrees Fahrenheit per decade over the last few decades. At the back of the base is a noisy and smelly breeding Gentoo penguin colony. There were several hungry and demanding chicks laying in their rock nests. The traffic of the penguins moving back and forth from the colony to the ocean to both feed and occasionally clean themselves creates deep ruts in the snow, colloquially called penguin highways.
I don't even fucking see this shit.
Across the water from the base, a huge iceberg was shifting. We left Vernadsky Base for a Zodiac cruise through the Argentine islands. Wordie House on Winter Island was built in 1947 as a British scientific base. However, in 1954, the base activity was moved to a new station named Faraday on the nearby neighboring Galindez Island. The station was renamed Vernadsky in 1996 when the UK transferred it to the Ukraine. without wave action. Ice was slowly forming on the ocean's surface.
Around the icebreaker.
Oh, thank you.
Already?
The other seal just slid into the water.
Leaving the seals behind, we set off in search of whales, and were soon blessed to come across a bay full of feeding whales. We were fortunate that the bay was full of whales, which came very close to us, so we got excellent views of them and could observe their feeding technique. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to film the whales around us as the boat kept moving because of both the surface movement and fellow passengers moving around in the boat. With the glaciated mountains on the mainland coast of Antarctica in the background and a clear blue sky overhead, this made the whale encounter a very unique experience. We were lucky to see humpback whales lunge feeding. During lunge feeding, the whales dive beneath a shoal of krill and then swim upwards at speed with their mouths wide open. They take in a giant mouthful of water and prey, which forces their throat pleats to expand several times their normal size. When surfacing, they force the water and krill out through their baleen with their powerful tongue. The krill is filtered out and then swallowed. Over several hours of continuous lunge feeding, a whale can ingest more than a ton of krill, which is enough to give it sufficient energy for the entire day. A climatic scene from Moby Dick flashed through my mind as a huge whale slammed directly towards our Zodiac and passed underneath it. Fortunately, the whale didn't sink our miniature rubberized deep. At times, the whales would rest on the surface to take a break from feeding before resuming vacuuming up krill.
That was a burp.
To find out where the whales would surface next, one simply had to watch where the kelp gulls gathered on the surface, as they wanted to eat the krill brought up to the surface by the whales' lunge feet.
So if you guys in the front can come down a little bit, lower down a little, you guys get that? Yes,
As the whale's head emerged, we could clearly see the callosities on it. Getting so close to a pod of humpback whales actively feeding was a unique and very memorable experience. The whales were totally at ease with our presence and carried on as if we weren't even there. As the whale's tail submerged, it was time to reluctantly leave the whale show and race the Gentoo penguins back to our ship. It was fascinating to see the sight of penguins porpoising along. While penguins can't fly through the air with their flippers, many penguin species take to the air as they launch themselves out of the water. Just before doing so, they release air bubbles from their feathers. This cuts down the drag on their bodies, allowing them to double or triple their swimming speeds quickly and to launch into the air. For example, most penguins swim underwater at around 6 to 11 kilometers per hour, but the fastest penguin, the Gentoo, can reach top speeds of 35 kilometers per hour when porpoising. The penguins left us at their colony and we motored on towards our ship. Leaving Vernansky, we started the long passage across the Bellingshausen Sea to the very remote and infrequently visited Peter I Island. Leaving the Antarctic Peninsula, we sailed through an area that was full of feeding humpback whales. Everywhere we looked, there were whales in front of a beautiful background of glaciated mountains and huge icebergs. The glacier-draped mountains along the icy coastland of Grahamland were very beautiful in the sunshine. Humpback whales are identified by the underside and trailing edge of their tail plumes. Each one is different, just like a fingerprint. When the huge whales were juxtaposed with icebergs, the ginormous size of the icebergs was manifest. Suddenly, a lunge-feeding humpback with its pleats fully expanded rose up beside our ship, and just as suddenly slid back beneath the surface. In part 3, we reach Peter I Island and then sail further south and search for a route through the heavy sea ice to the Ross Ice Shelf. Along the way, we witness many interesting sights, including emperor penguins at sea and killer whales attacking a minke whale. In part 3 of this Ross Sea Voyage series, we transit the Bellingshausen Sea to reach the very remote and infrequently visited Peter I Island. We take a sightseeing trip over Peter I Island and then transit the Amundsen Sea to reach the fabled Ross Sea. At the end of part 2, we left behind the Antarctic Peninsula with its waters filled with feeding whales and started our transit across the Bellingshausen Sea to Peter I Island. As we sailed across the Bellingshausen Sea, we started to see a parade of huge icebergs passing by. The huge icebergs came in every imaginable shape and size, with some being truly fantastic in form. In the Southern Ocean, the Antarctic ice sheet is the chief source of icebergs. Scientists estimate that the lifespan of an iceberg is being about 3,000 years, from first snowfall on a glacier till final melting when the ocean currents carry them into the warmer waters. The huge icebergs stood out on the ship's radar. Finally, we were nearing the Antarctic Circle at a latitude of 66 degrees 33 minutes and 39 seconds south of the equator. Within the Antarctic Circle, all places have 24 hours of daylight on summer solstice in December, whilst in June, on the winter solstice, all places have 24 hours of darkness. Finally, after 2 days of transiting across the Bellingshausen Sea, the ship's charting system showed that we were only 2.5 hours from Peter I Island, which lies 450 kilometers or 280 miles off the coast of Antarctica. As well as melting in warmer waters, icebergs are relentlessly subjected to the action of waves, which adds to the berg's erosion. We arrived off Peter I Island at 8 p.m., but as there was close to 24 hours of daylight, a landing was still a possibility. The weather conditions were surprisingly good when we first arrived, so the chance of landing on the island seemed good. However, the expedition leader dithered about what to do, and after several hours of inaction, the conditions were no longer favorable for landing, so we settled for a helicopter flypast of the island. This outcome was very disappointing for passengers whose goal was to land on this remote island. The island is dominated by a huge dormant volcano called Lars Christiansen Peak, which soars to a height of 1,640 meters or 5,380 feet above sea level. It was named after the whaler ship owner Lars Christiansen, who financed the 1929 Norwegian expedition which claimed the island for Norway. A helicopter was sent on recce before flight-seeing operations started. With a landing on Peter I Island off the table, the plan became simply to fly along the coast of the island. The helicopter on the landing pad was flown off for a reconnaissance flight, whilst the remaining 2 helicopters in the hangar were dragged out and their rotor blades installed for flight. It would take 4 hours to wrap up flight-seeing operations, so there was plenty of time to keep an eye out for activity around the island.
Sorry, which side? Left side, right side?
Right side. I was going to say down.
Nearly all of the island is covered by a glacier, and it is surrounded most of the year by pack ice, making it inaccessible during these times. Hence the island is very rarely visited, let alone landed upon. Peter I Island is a 156 square kilometer or 60 square mile uninhabited volcanic island claimed as a dependency by Norway. The island was first sighted by the Russian Bellingshausen expedition in 1821, which named it for Tsar Peter I of Russia. However, it was not until over 100 years later, in 1929, that the first landing was made by a Norwegian expedition which claimed it for Norway. Peter I Island is nearly 95% glaciated, with ice fields reaching down to the sea, almost all the way around the island, although there are 3 small rocky beaches where zodiacs may make a hazardous landing. Finally, it was our turn to board the next helicopter for a 15-minute flight along the coast of Peter I Island, but unfortunately there'd be no landing. Our Aerospatiale Écureuil or squirrel helicopter carried 5 passengers in total, with 4 in the rear and 1 in the co-pilot seat. Fortunately, I scored the co-pilot seat, so had a good view during the flight compared to those sitting in the middle seats in the rear. Our helicopter ride took us over icebergs, humpback whales, and along the coast to see the rugged glaciated island up close. The cloud deck was low, but on the horizon we could see a band of red produced as the sun was slowly setting, going on 11 p.m. Flew over an iceberg with what looked like an aquamarine swimming pool in it, but of course a person wouldn't last long in the cold Antarctic waters. The glaciers that reached down to the ocean routinely calved icebergs, which were scattered in the waters around the island. Fortunately for all on board, I resisted the urge to start flying the helicopter from the co-pilot's seat. The deep crevasses in the glaciers foreshadowed the calving of more new icebergs. As we turned away from the coast and headed back to the ship, we could see how small our ship looked from a bird's eye view. As we flew back to the ship, we could see a whale near a huge iceberg. The large whale looked so small compared to the ginormous iceberg. Although the short flights only lasted 15 minutes, it took 4 hours using 3 helicopters until the flight seeing operation ended at 1 a.m. Back on board, we could resume watching the whales diving to feed near the iceberg until all the flights were over and the helicopters safely stowed back on board for continuance of our voyage southwards. With the helicopters stored back on board, we sailed from Peter I Island southwards towards the Bay of Whales in the Ross Sea. Soon after departing Peter I Island, we encountered an area of brash ice, but we were still well outside the outer edge of the summer sea ice extent. We'd enter into the summer sea ice days later as we tried to navigate into the Bay of Whales. Crab-eater seals took advantage of the far offshore brash ice to rest. However, the ocean swells made their ice pans move impressively up and down, which may have been either relaxing or annoying. The crab-eater seal is the most abundant seal species in the world, with population estimates ranging as high as 75 million individuals. Despite its name, crab-eater seals do not eat crab. Rather, they have specialized teeth to strain krill from the water. Although it was always interesting to watch our ship force its way through the brash ice, this significantly slowed down the ship's progress and served to reduce our time available to explore the Ross Sea. Soon we exited the area of brash ice and re-entered the open ocean, and the parade of huge icebergs resumed. It was interesting to see what, if anything, would emerge into view from behind one of the huge icebergs. Sometimes, another more distant iceberg would emerge. One of the huge icebergs had a patch of smooth ice on its rugged surface that looked remarkably like a map of North America. Some of the icebergs were tilting and approaching the point at which they'd roll over. Leaving the Bellingshausen Sea, we entered the Amundsen Sea, which was named by the Norwegian expedition of 1929 in honor of the Norwegian polar explorer Roald Amundsen, who in 1911 was the first to reach the South Pole. In this part of the Amundsen Sea, huge icebergs filled the ship's radar screen. When the sun was shining, it was very nice to be out on the deck watching the brightly illuminated parade of icebergs pass by.
see the birds on the iceberg there?
The shape of some of the icebergs was fantastical, and even though they were huge, it was only a matter of time until they broke apart and melted away in the warmer waters that they were slowly being carried towards. Occasionally, we'd be lucky to pass by some active humpback whales blowing and sounding in the Amundsen Sea that was dotted with huge icebergs. As the sun set after midnight, we passed by a huge iceberg that resembled an aircraft carrier. In front of this huge aircraft carrier of an iceberg, there was a pod of humpback whales blowing and sounding. Their blows looked like spouts of gold in the golden glow at sunset. The final act of this wonderful sunset was a golden sun sliding down behind the clouds on the horizon. Overnight, there was a light snowfall that changed the look of the deck and also made it slippery. In part 4 of this series, we sailed to the end of the Bay of Whales, which marks our closest approach to the South Pole. We then make the long 600-kilometer transit along the front of the Ross Ice Shelf to McMurdo Sound, where we spend days exploring and making landings in this deep part of Antarctica. This is a film about a voyage to the famous McMurdo Sound in the Ross Sea in deepest Antarctica. To get to McMurdo Sound and back, the total distance sailed was 6,400 nautical miles, or 12,000 kilometers. Austral summer sea ice frequently prevents easy entrance to the Ross Sea, making it necessary to find a gap in the sea ice using satellite photographs. Of course, due to winds and currents, the sea ice is not static, and so a gap in the sea ice through to the Ross Sea, as seen in a satellite photo, might close up before we got through it, thus preventing our entry. As the sea ice thickened, our progress from the Amundsen Sea towards the Ross Sea slowed. Our ice-strengthened ship, with its UL-1 ice classification, could only navigate through solid one-year sea ice and loose multi-year pack ice. However, it's not an icebreaker, and with only 4,300 horsepower, it could only push its way through the ice floes. Occasionally, ice turned over by the ship would reveal colorful algae that lives on the underside. As seen on the ship's radar, we were surrounded by heavy pack ice with seemingly no easy way forward. The weather changed constantly, swinging from cold and overcast one hour to warm and sunny the next. However, the dense pack ice did not change.
Hardport. Hardport. Which is 10 years.
Yeah.
Roger, hard port.
The seemingly endless sea ice brought our progress to a standstill, so one of the helicopters was dispatched on an ice reconnaissance to find a way forward. Fortunately, the good news from the ice reconnaissance was that pack ice-free water was not that far ahead, so the captain set a new course and off we went again. On the final ice floes, we saw a number of animals, including crab-eater seals and penguins. We passed by an emperor penguin stuck on an ice floe until its annual molting was over, and it had a new coat of feathers. Its old feathers littered the ice floe.
And the other one should go in soon.
You guys run.
In a short while, we were largely free from the pack ice and through to the mainly ice-free waters of the Ross Sea, where we were greeted by a pod of minke whales. The captain turned the ship hard to starboard to allow us a better view of the pod. The Antarctic minke whale is the second smallest baleen whale. A mature male measures about 7 meters and typically weighs 5 tons. Minke whales can live up to 50 years. Surprisingly, we came upon the rarely seen sight of a pod of orca hunting down and killing a minke whale. The maximum swimming speed of minkies has been estimated at 38 kilometers per hour. Their speed is their only defense mechanism when pursued by orca or Japanese whalers. Unfortunately, Japan still hunts the Antarctic minke whale. The orca or killer whale is the largest member of the dolphin family, with a mature adult measuring about 7 meters and typically weighing 6 tons. Orca are apex predators, as no animals prey on them. Orca predation on minke whales is not uncommon, but it is rarely observed. Studies have found that the orcas like to eat the minke's tongue and lower jaw. It was not known how long the orca had been chasing the minke before we saw them, but sometimes these chases last for hours until the minke whale tires out, allowing the orca to finally close in and kill their prey. The orca's large size and strength make it among the fastest of marine animals, able to reach speeds in excess of 56 kilometers per hour, which is faster than the minke whale. Orca are sometimes called wolves of the sea because they hunt in a group like a pack of wolves. The coordination of the orca attack on the minke that we witnessed was obvious. Once the orca tired out the minke, the pod of orca attacked it by biting it about the throat and swimming over top of it to make it harder for the minke to breathe or to simply drown it. During the pursuit, the orca flanked the minke from all sides, preventing its escape. They rammed its sides repeatedly to weaken the minke and even swam on top of it, forcing its head underwater.
Oh, wow. Oh, there's blood in the water, too. They're tearing something apart.
Yeah, right. Oh God.
Oh,
Somebody is bleeding badly.
yeah.
Once stopped, the struggle was one-sided as minkies do not physically defend themselves. Rather, they depend on their endurance swimming at speed. So when the whale is tired out by the pursuit, the outcome is certain. When the minke stopped moving, the orca feasted on it before it sank too deep. As the whale was being ripped apart, seabirds, including snow petrels, flocked around the kill site looking for scraps of food. With the bite wounds, oil flowed out of the minke whale's blubber, creating a sheen on the ocean surface around the whale. After witnessing the death of the minke whale, the sight of the 2-meter-tall dorsal fin of a male orca rising out of the ocean was even more impressive and ominous. After over half of an hour of observing the drama, we moved on, but the orca continued to feed on the minke carcass. The death of the minke whale at the jaws of the orca demonstrated to us why sailors of old called these mammals whale killers. This name was eventually flipped around to become killer whale. With the sea ice free, we made good time towards the Bay of Whales, which would be our furthest penetration south. We then made the 600-kilometer long transit along the front of the Ross Ice Shelf to McMurdo off the apparently endless Ross Ice Shelf at 2 a.m., but there was still plenty of light to see the minke whales. The Ross Ice Shelf is the largest ice shelf in Antarctica, with an area about the size of France. It is several hundred meters thick, with a nearly vertical ice front to the open ocean, and it's more than 600 kilometers long and between 15 to 50 meters high above the water's surface. Unfortunately, Japan still hunts the Antarctic minke whale. The ice shelf is named after Sir James Clerk Ross, who discovered it on the 28th of January 1841 and called it the Barrier, as it prevented him sailing further south. Finally, we arrived at the end of the Bay of Whales, some 1,300 kilometers from the South Pole, where we could go no further due to the ice shelf. This was the area where, in 1911, Roald Amundsen started his successful dog sled journey to become the first human to reach the South Pole on 14 December 1911. All 5 members of his party returned. 5 weeks later, Robert Scott, starting from Ross Island, also reached the South Pole, but this time by man-hauling sleds. Tragically, all 5 members of his party died on the return journey. Ice shelves are thick plates of ice that float atop an ocean and are fed continuously by inland glaciers. The Ross Ice Shelf pushes out to sea at between 1.5 to 3 kilometers a day. Sometimes fissures and cracks cause part of the shelf to break off, as huge tabular icebergs. The largest known is about 31,000 square kilometers, which is slightly larger than Belgium. This iceberg, known as B-15, is the world's largest recorded iceberg and was calved from the Ross Ice Shelf during March 2000. Over the years, it broke into huge pieces, which in turn moved past McMurdo Sound and along the Victoria Land coast into the Southern Ocean. The Fata Morgana mirage along the Ross Ice Shelf was very interesting. we were lucky to be approached by a pod of orca. The orca, or killer whale, is the largest member of the dolphin family, with a mature adult measuring about 7 meters and typically weighing 6 tons. Orca are apex predators, as no animals prey on them. The orca's large size and strength make it among the fastest of marine animals, able to reach speeds in excess of 56 kilometers per hour. Orca are sometimes called wolves of the sea, because they hunt in a group like a pack of wolves. Fresh in our memories was the scene that we had recently witnessed of a pod of orca attacking and killing a minke whale. The trip leaders decided that the conditions weren't right for a helicopter landing on the ice shelf at Cape Crozier, so we sailed on to McMurdo Sound, scanning the ice floes for penguins and seals. After sailing past the Ross ice shelf, we spent days exploring the McMurdo Sound area. Many days were spent sailing to and fro, waiting for the winds to die down and the seas to calm so that we could go ashore. In the end, we were able to go ashore 3 times. Firstly at Taylor Valley, Cape Evans, and then Cape Bird. As well, we were able to visit McMurdo Station. While sailing about, we sometimes had good opportunities to see wildlife, including seals, penguins, and orca. Wildlife on the ice floes mainly didn't react to the passage of the ship. However, occasionally seals or penguins would react and hurriedly re-enter the sea. It was fascinating to see the sight of penguins porpoising along. While penguins can't fly through the air with their flippers, many penguin species take to the air as they launch themselves out of the water. Just before doing so, they release air bubbles from their feathers. This cuts down the drag on their bodies, allowing them to double or triple their swimming speeds quickly and to launch into the air. The ship was in position in McMurdo Sound for a helicopter visit to the dry valleys. However, high winds prevented any helicopter operations for several days, but as we waited for the winds to subside, we could watch the Adelie penguins and even a couple of emperor penguins coming and going at the edge of the vast area of fast ice. Adelie penguins normally hunt prey within the first 50 meters of the sea, where light availability is greatest, but they can descend to 170 meters if required. Their prey is mainly krill. Watching corpulent seals moving on ice was like watching an earthworm moving about. Occasionally, we'd see the fascinating sight of a large group of penguins entering the sea all at once. How they didn't run into each other remains a mystery. As skuas prey on penguins, it was surprising to see the two standing virtually cheek to jowl. Every now and then, some emperor penguins would appear, which caused great excitement amongst the passengers. Emperor penguins are the largest of the penguin species and noticeably larger than the Adelie penguins. Finally, the gale wind died down and the seas calmed so that we were able to fly into Taylor Valley. This is the southernmost of the 3 large dry valleys in the trans-Antarctic mountains of Victoria Land. Taylor Valley was discovered in the austral summer of 1903-1904 by the British National Antarctic Expedition led by Robert Scott. Scott and his party were returning from a 240-kilometer trek onto the polar plateau when they entered Taylor Valley, the southernmost of the McMurdo Dry Valleys. The dry valleys are so named because of their extremely low humidity and lack of snow or ice covering, making the region one of the world's most extreme deserts. In fact, precipitation only averages around 100 millimeters per year, all in the form of snow. The powerful katabatic winds rapidly evaporate the snow, so little melts into the soil. The major reasons that the valleys are so dry are twofold. Firstly, the surrounding mountains block the seaward flowing ice from the East Antarctic ice sheet from reaching the Ross Sea, and secondly, the powerful katabatic winds that can reach speeds up to 320 kilometers per hour evaporate all water, ice, and snow. We flew by some rocky islets with mysterious ice pinnacles dotting their surface. These were the only ice pinnacles that we saw during our voyage. At 4,800 square kilometers, the valleys constitute the largest ice-free region in Antarctica. The huge fan-shaped terminus of the Commonwealth Glacier is very impressive. The glacier was named by Robert Scott in 1911 for the Commonwealth of Australia. Scientists consider the dry valleys the closest of any terrestrial environment to that of the planet Mars, and thus an important source of insight into possible extraterrestrial life. We landed near the terminus of the Canada Glacier in glorious sunshine. Despite these images, it's hard to visualize the beautiful scene that we were presented with when we stepped off the helicopter at the foot of the Canada Glacier. The glacier positively glistened under a brilliant sun and a bright blue sky. As elsewhere around McMurdo Sound, the area where visitors can land and walk about in Taylor Valley is restricted to a specific visitor zone with a designated path. The valley floor is covered with coarse, loose gravel. It was amazing to see an emaciated, mummified crab-eater seal. However, there's no widely accepted explanation as to why the seal ended up some 25 kilometers from the sea. It's not even clear how old the mummy is, as carbon dating results range between 100 and 2,600 years. Too soon, it was time to board the helicopter for the return flight to the ship. After leaving the Dry Valleys area, we sailed deeper into McMurdo Sound towards McMurdo Station. McMurdo Station is a U.S. research center on the tip of Ross Island, a territory claimed by New Zealand. McMurdo is the largest station in Antarctica, capable of supporting 1,200 residents. Mount Erebus, which dominates Ross Island, was named by James Ross after one of his ships in 1841. We were lucky that our visit coincided with Operation Deep Freeze, the annual resupply sea lift to McMurdo Station. Hence, we were able to see the United States Coast Guard icebreaker Polar Star in action as it patrolled the wide channel that it had cut into the ice to allow cargo ships to reach McMurdo's harbor. The Polar Star is the only icebreaker in the United States fleet large enough to break the heavy sea ice to access McMurdo Station. The Polar Star, the United States' only operational heavy icebreaker, was commissioned in 1976 and is near the end of its useful service life. The 13,000-ton Polar Star is able to break through ice up to 6.4 meters thick by backing up and ramming, and can steam continuously through 1.8 meters of ice at 3 knots. To break the channel into McMurdo Station for resupply, the Polar Star makes an annual 18,500-kilometer voyage from its home port to McMurdo Sound. After its arrival in McMurdo Sound, the Polar Star starts cutting a wide navigable channel through the seasonal and multi-year ice, sometimes as much as 6.4 meters thick. Once it is cut, the powerful katabatic south winds sweep the broken ice out of the channel. However, the cool temperatures cause the open water to slowly freeze over, so the Polar Star continuously patrols the channel to keep it from refreezing. As our ship sailed down the channel cut by the Polar Star, we passed by the Polar Star itself and pushed through newly formed grease ice that was on its way to forming new ice. Along the ice edges on either side of the channel were seals, skuas, and Adelian emperor penguins. At McMurdo's pier was the U.S. cargo freighter Ocean Giant offloading its cargo. Nearby on Hut Point is Discovery Hut, which was built by Robert Falcon Scott for the British National Antarctic Expedition of 1902. McMurdo Station was built by the United States and opened in 1956 as part of Operation Deep Freeze. Atop Observation Hill is a 3-meter wooden cross erected in 1913 and inscribed with the names of Scott's ill-fated South Pole Party and the final line of Alfred Tennyson's poem Ulysses, which reads, "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Unfortunately, we weren't able to land at McMurdo Station as station management felt that our presence would interfere with the unloading of the resupply ship. Hence, we sailed back up the channel towards our next destination of Cape Evans. Water sky is the dark appearance of the underside of a cloud layer when it is over a surface of open water. Water sky is useful in ice navigation because one can tell if open water is present. As we were sailing up the channel, a pod of Type C orca was cruising down the channel towards McMurdo Station. After the seasonal ice breaking has begun, these orca take advantage of the foraging habitat made accessible by this channel. The orca were wasting no time as they headed towards the newly opened hunting grounds.
Cool. Yeah, nice. Wow.
At the end of the channel, we again passed by the Polar Star and the tanker Maersk Perry, which had been parked in the pack ice until McMurdo's pier was free. The Maersk Perry was designed for working in the polar regions and delivers fuel to Thule Air Force Base in Greenland in the Arctic summer and to McMurdo Station in the Austral summer. A month later, I came across the Polar Star tied up alongside in Wellington, New Zealand, as it was on its return voyage to Seattle. Mount Erebus, at nearly 3,800 meters, is the southernmost active volcano on Earth. The volcano has been active for about 1.3 million years. In 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 on an Antarctic sightseeing flight hit Mount Erebus, killing all 257 people on board. The waves pounding the iceberg at the foot of Mount Erebus made for a fascinating sight as we sailed past. Adelies were resting on ice floes and some were on bergy bits. One bergy bit had slowly started rolling over, causing the penguins to slide off into the ocean. Although over 100 years had passed, my dress for the Cape Evans landing was very similar to that worn by Robert Scott all those years ago. Cape Evans is the most historic site in Antarctica, as it is where Robert Falcon Scott erected a hut for the British Antarctic expedition of 1910-1913. It was from this hut that he left on his ill-fated trek to the South Pole. The hut remains much as it was when Scott left it. Arriving off Cape Evans, the weather cooperated, and so we made the short Zodiac ride to the volcanic black sand beach near Scott's hut. Scott's hut, prefabricated in England, measures 15 meters by 7.5 meters. It was divided into separate areas for sleeping and working. After 1917, the hut remained untouched until 1956, when U.S. personnel dug it out of the snow and ice. Still stuck in the beach near the hut is the anchor of Shackleton's Ross Sea party ship Aurora, which in 1915 broke away in a storm, leaving 10 men without many of their provisions. During the winter of 1911, 25 men lived in the hut. From there, on the 1st of November 1911, Scott and his men set out on the ultimately fatal trek to the South Pole. Scott's party of 5 reached the pole on the 17th of January, only to find that Amundsen had preceded them by 5 weeks. Scott wrote in his diary, "Great God, this is an awful place." The bodies of Scott and his companions were discovered by a search party on 12 November 1912. Surprisingly, Scott decided to use Manchurian ponies to support his attempt on the pole. Unlike Amundsen's sled dogs, the bigger ponies would plunge through the top layer of snow, making progress too difficult. As well, some of the ponies were eaten by orca. Outside the hut were crab-eater seals both on the beach and in the water. The scene was much the same as it was in 1911. The large cross on Weathervane Hill was erected by the Ross Sea party of Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition of 1914-1917 in memory of 3 members of the party who died in the vicinity in 1916. Returning to our ship, the spell cast by the anachronistic Scott hut was broken but not forgotten. From Cape Evans, we sailed north towards the Cape Bird penguin colony at the northern tip of Ross Island. We passed by Cape Royds, but the sea was deemed too rough for a landing. Cape Royds is the site of the historic hut from the British Antarctic expedition of 1907-1909 that was led by Ernest Shackleton. It's also the site of the southernmost Adelie penguin colony. As there was no exercise space on board, passengers frequently walked in circles around the upper deck. We sailed alongside huge tabular icebergs that had broken off the Ross Sea ice shelf years ago and were slowly making their way along the coast towards the Southern Ocean. The nearest iceberg was some 10 kilometers long and 30 meters above the waterline. We sailed around until the two huge icebergs framed Mount Erebus. On the fast ice between the bergs were seals and penguins resting. Near the huge tabular iceberg, we were lucky to come across a pod of orca hunting for their next meal. A smoking Mount Erebus provided an excellent background for this scene. The hungry orca relentlessly checked out ice floes for seals or penguins, and soon found floes with penguins aboard. There were Adelie penguins on ice floes as the orca moved in. The predators of adult and juvenile Adelie penguins at sea are orca and leopard seals. A group of 5 emperor penguins on a large ice floe was surrounded by a pod of orca circling them. It was fascinating to watch the pod of orca hunting the emperors, just like a pack of African wild dogs hunt their prey. The orca were playing a waiting game to see if the emperors would leave the relative safety of their ice floe. The orca employed spy hopping to keep good track of the penguins. Unfortunately, we didn't wait to see how the hunt played out as we sailed on to the Cape Bird penguin colony. Off the Cape Bird penguin colony, we boarded Zodiacs to land at the colony. The Cape Bird colony is spread out along some 10 kilometers of beachfront. We landed at the North colony, which is the largest, with about 40,000 breeding pairs. On our trip into the beach, we paused at an iceberg to watch a large group of Adelies on the berg. After milling about for a while, finally a group of Adelies started to cascade off the berg. It was a very impressive sight. Come on, more!
A few of them I have.
More! The beach in front of the colony was a hive of activity as the Adelies came in and went out to sea. At the colony, those who were so inclined had the opportunity for a polar dip. I opted to take the plunge alongside some penguins, which decided to watch from the warmth of the beach. It wasn't a quick dip, as it was painful to walk over the stones on the beach and those that were under the water. At 0 degrees, the water was decidedly refreshing and didn't encourage me to linger at all. Once out of the frigid water, the air felt positively balmy. At the end of my polar dip, I was left with lasting respect for the wildlife that lives in the polar sea. As our visit was at the end of the breeding season for the Adelie penguins, the chicks were molting and their parents were trying to stop feeding the chicks that were as big as them. However, the chicks didn't like the new arrangement, so would chase their parents around to get food. Finally, after the parents stumbled, the chick caught up and begged again for food, but the parent had either nothing to give or didn't want to give anything, and so the pursuit began again. In the relative safety of their rookeries, Adelie chicks may still be taken by skuas and giant petrels. Leaving Cape Bird, we sailed northwards from Ross Island and out of McMurdo Sound towards Cape Adare. Soon we were back in the sea ice and experiencing the ocean swells. We sailed past a trio of emperor penguins stuck on an ice floe until their annual molting was finished and they had a new coat of feathers. As the ship isn't an icebreaker, it gingerly pushed through the pack ice, leaving a clear track behind before the track rapidly closed up. As we headed further north, the ocean swells increased in size, causing one to slide about in bed at times. The setting sun brought a fitting close to our excellent adventures in the historic McMurdo Sound area.
This is a film about a voyage along the historic coast of Victoria Land in the Ross Sea and deepest Antarctica. To get to the Ross Sea and back, the total distance sailed was 6,400 nautical miles, or 12,000 kilometers. There are a number of historic sites and modern research stations along the coast of Victoria Land, but access to them was totally dependent on cooperative pack ice conditions and wind speeds.
We sailed past the end of the Dragolsky ice tongue, which was discovered by British explorer Robert Falcon Scott in 1902. It is thought to be at least 4,000 years old. The ice tongue is essentially a floating glacier that stretches 70 kilometers out to sea from the end of the David Glacier. It ranges from 14 to 24 kilometers in width and is a few hundred meters thick. In March 2000, a huge iceberg named B-15 calved from the Ross Ice Shelf near Roosevelt Island. B-15 measured around 300 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide. B-15 eventually fragmented and a piece called iceberg B-15A eventually collided with the Dragolsky ice tongue in April 2005, breaking off an 8 square kilometer section of the ice tongue. In March 2006, iceberg C-16 also hit the ice tongue, breaking off another piece. The large ocean swells moving through the pack ice gave the seals and penguins resting on the floes a dynamic ride. Sometimes when we passed by a seal or penguin resting on a floe, they would take one look at the ship and then re-enter the ocean. Having passed by the Dragolsky ice tongue, we entered into Terra Nova Bay and started pushing our way through the pack ice to reach either Inexpressible Island or the Italian or South Korean stations that are found in the bay. Our progress through the ice pack was very slow as the ship's power is not exceptional. The big swells in the ice pack move the ice floes and penguins on them dramatically up and down. Our ice-strengthened ship, with its 4,300 horsepower, was simply too underpowered to push through the pack ice. So after an hour or so of trying, the captain headed out of the bay, back towards the open sea. Watching corpulent seals moving on ice was like watching an earthworm moving about. Mature Weddell seals are about 3 meters long and weigh about 500 kilograms, making them amongst the largest seal. We saw many Weddell seals as they have a circumpolar distribution around Antarctica. Ironically, these seals are named after a sealer, Captain James Weddell, who led sealing expeditions to Antarctica in the 1820s. The seemingly never-ending pack ice made for slow going, and the ship only has about 4,300 horsepower. Given the failure to land in Terra Nova Bay, we sailed on past Cape Washington and into Wood Bay, where the expedition leader thought there would be better conditions, but in the event, the sea and wind kept us aboard again. Although we didn't get off the ship at Wood Bay, we were lucky to see a pod of orca hunting along the edge of the pack ice. Surprisingly, the possibility of the orca's dorsal fins hitting the ice floes didn't stop the orca from cruising through the pack ice in search of food. The Adelie, resting on the ice floe, was probably unaware of the pod of orca that was entering the scene as he jumped into the water. The orca concentrated their search for food along the edge of the pack ice, where they could more easily attack anything edible found on an ice floe. The orca were rapidly swimming through the pack ice, but continually lifting their heads up to check the ice floes for edibles. The orca became fixated on looking at the ice mushroom, which from our vantage point didn't seem to have any animal resting on it, and in the event, the orca gave up on the ice mushroom and continued cruising along the edge of the pack ice. The orca were spy hopping in the pack ice. When spy hopping, the orca sticks its head out of the water to see if anything edible is on the ice floes. Should a penguin or seal be noticed, then an attack would likely follow.
They're spy hopping in the ice. There it is again. There they are. You see them?
Soon the orca swam out of view and we resumed our course towards Cape Adare. The big swell caused waves to break dramatically against the icebergs, with water being thrown up to 30 meters in the air. Without stopping, we continued along the coast towards Cape Hallett. The big swell caused by a distant cyclone made for heavy pitching of the ship. Near Cape Hallett, we entered the extensive ice pack in Mowbray Bay to hopefully find calmer winds for an off-ship activity. The Cape was the location of a scientific base that was established in the International Geophysical Year of 1957 and was manned permanently until 1964 when there was a major fire. The ship's 4,300 horsepower engine strained to push the ship forward into the pack ice. Again, the ship wasn't able to push deep into the ice-choked Mowbray Bay. Pushing further into the pack ice, we passed by a number of surprised Adelie penguins. Mowbray Bay is ringed by the beautiful Admiralty mountain range. Finally, the pack ice's increasing thickness stopped our progress, and so it was decided to use the helicopters to make a flight-seeing trip out over the distant shoreline.
With the blades attached, it was soon time to lift off for a flight-seeing trip out to Cape Hallett. Once airborne, the extent of the pack ice was obvious, and it was also clear how little our ship had actually penetrated into the pack ice despite hours of pushing. The flight-seeing trip took us over the dense pack ice holding some large icebergs prisoners to the rocky promontory of Cape Hallett. Once over Cape Hallett, the coastal Palomina of Edso Inlet was evident. This area of open water results from strong katabatic winds driving sea ice away from the coastline.
West of Cape Hallett, we flew near the large breeding colony of Adelie penguins on CD Hook. Mount Herschel, named in 1841 by British explorer James Clark Ross in honor of British astronomer John Herschel, isn't the highest peak in the Admiralty Mountains, but its razor-sharp outline dominates Mowbray Bay. Mount Herschel was first climbed in 1967 by a team led by Sir Edmund Hillary of Everest fame. As there were 3 helicopters coming and going from the ship, at times we'd have to circle the ship and wait to land on board if another helicopter was loading passengers or refueling.
Finally, with the departure of the other helicopter from the landing pad, we were able to make our landing back aboard.
It took several hours to complete the sightseeing flights, so there was plenty of time on the ship to watch seals and penguins coming and going. The brash ice was so thick that the seal had difficulty getting underwater. Mowbray Bay in the bright sunshine was full of wondrous sights. Although we were deep in the pack ice, the huge swells continued to move the ship dramatically up and down.
The swells made movement across the ice difficult and dangerous for the penguins. Surprisingly, the heaving ice suddenly revealed an emperor penguin.
After 11 hours in the pack ice, the helicopter flights were complete and we pushed out of the pack ice into the open water. During our stay in Mowbray Bay, the light conditions changed dramatically, making for some beautiful scenes. After much pushing, we were finally at the ice edge where we entered the ice-free waters and our speed could increase again. As we were exiting the pack ice, we passed a minke whale that was just entering the pack ice from the open water. Leaving Cape Hallett, we sailed along the Adair Peninsula towards Cape Adair and passed by the Possession Islands. These islands are a collection of small islands and rocks.
Foyne Island is named after Sven Foyne, a Norwegian who introduced the modern harpoon cannon to the whaling industry in the 19th century, which then went on to decimate the whale population in the Southern Ocean. An Adelie penguin rookery covers much of Foyne Island. The green algae growing on the snow added color to what otherwise was a drab landscape. The basalt columns clearly showed the volcanic origin of the Possession Islands. Favreau pillars of volcanic remnant dramatically rising straight out of the sea. The large tabular iceberg in the background added to the wonderful scene. The view of an iceberg through the twin arches of Christensen Rocks was intriguing. The dead penguin floating on the surface was a reminder of the precarious nature of life in Antarctica.
The Possession Islands were named by Captain James Clark Ross in commemoration of him planting the British flag on Possession Island on January the 12th, 1841, to claim their possession for Queen Victoria. Interesting sight on Possession Island was the strange sighting of Adelie penguins lining the cornice cliff. Clearly these penguins were oblivious to the danger of the cornices breaking off and plunging some 30 meters into the Ross Sea.
Soon the Possession Islands fell astern as we sailed on towards Cape Adare, with a glorious sunset over Mount Herschel and the other transantarctic mountains.
Leaving the Possession Islands astern, we sailed along the Adair Peninsula towards Cape Adare, which separates the Ross Sea to the east from the Southern Ocean to the west. We finally rounded Cape Adare and entered Robertson Bay, which would be our final stop in Antarctica, so we hope for favorable conditions for off-ship activities. When we finally arrived off Cape Adare, the winds reported to be gusting to 80 knots had died down, and it was dead calm. As Cape Adare is home to a large Adelie penguin colony, the waters and ice of Robertson Bay were alive with penguins. It was fascinating to see the sight of penguins porpoising along. While penguins can't fly through the air with their flippers, many penguin species take to the air as they launch themselves out of the water. Just before doing so, they release air bubbles from their feathers. This cuts down the drag on their bodies, allowing them to double or triple their swimming speeds quickly and to launch into the air. For example, most penguins swim underwater at around 6 to 11 kilometers per hour, but the fastest penguin, the Gen 2, can reach top speeds of 35 kilometers per hour when porpoising.
But you know the ship is moving slowly when the penguins are steaming by you.
We cruised south into Robertson Bay towards Duke of York Island, where we were supposed to land like Borchgrevink had done in 1899. However, although the conditions were favorable, the landing was cancelled, so we sailed back towards Cape Adare on a dead flat Robertson Bay. Even though the waters of Robertson Bay were dead calm, our expedition leader dithered about what to do, so we sat idle for hours. which gave us time to watch minke whales and adelies swimming about.
Oh, there they are. See,
Yep.
do you see them? They're
Yep.
out in the open water now. Okay, so it's all happening for us. We got the whales, we got the penguins.
Yeah, but we've got no zodiacs.
Yeah. They're motoring right along. They're not wasting time doing anything.
When penguins are resting on the water's surface, they look much more bird-like than when they are either swimming underwater or walking around on land. Flying over the ice floes were giant petrels and skuas looking for food, which primarily means penguins. On one ice floe, schools were happily stripping penguin carcasses down to the bone. While on another floe, a variety of predators and prey were relaxing together in apparent harmony. It was surprising to see the scarce white morph of the southern giant petrel.
Oh, there's one right in front of you.
In the early morning hours, the handful of people on deck were blessed to see a pod of minke whales swimming about in the golden light of sunrise. After hours of dithering, the trip leader decided that we could finally visit Ridley Beach, which is home to one of the largest Adelie penguin colonies in Antarctica. As well, the beach is home to Borchgrevink's hut, which is the first human overwinter habitation on the continent.
This is a great view. Sunny day. The ship is beautiful.
The Zodiac trip to Ridley Beach was a long one as the ship stopped far offshore, so we had lots of time to enjoy the slalom ride through the ice floes. Arriving off Ridley Beach, the size of the colony was evident, and in fact the Ridley Beach Adelie penguin colony is currently the largest for the species, with approximately 340,000 breeding pairs in season. Studies have found that the first penguin pioneers arrived at Ridley Beach about 50 AD, when Julius Caesar was beginning his invasion of Britain, and so some 150 generations have used this site. However, it's surmised that Ridley Beach will probably be abandoned in the near future due to rising sea levels in the region. It was entertaining to watch the molting chicks braving their first swim in the ocean as they sought to join adult penguins on a nearby ice floe. The penguins are prey for many predators, both on land and in the water. On land, the main predators are birds like the skua and the giant petrel. As our visit was at the end of the breeding season for the Adelie penguins, the chicks were molting and their parents were trying to stop feeding the chicks that were as big as them. However, the chicks didn't like the new arrangement, so would chase their parents around to get food. In January 1895, an expedition led by Norwegian explorer Karsten Borchgrevink landed at Cape Adare as the first documented landing on Antarctica. Borchgrevink returned to the Cape leading his own British-funded expedition in 1899 and erected 2 huts, the first human structures built on Antarctica. The expedition members wintered over and the survivors were picked up in January 1900. This was the first expedition party ever to winter over on the Antarctic continent. The expedition zoologist Nikolai Hansen, who died during the winter, is buried at Cape Adare. Unfortunately, our limited time ashore was cut short for an unexplained reason, and we had to return to the ship. Back on board the ship, the good weather continued, and the reason for the hasty departure from Ridley Beach was never made clear. Luckily, the good wildlife viewing continued in Robertson Bay. Our final activity on the Antarctic continent was flight seeing over Shipley Glacier. The Shipley Glacier is 40 kilometers long and splits in 2 as it nears the ocean. Waiting for our helicopter flight, we got a good view of the rotor blades being installed on the Eurocopter AS-355 helicopter. A large nunatak separates the east and west arms of the Shipley Glacier as they flow into Robertson Bay. The seaward end of the glacier was first mapped by the northern party of the British Antarctic Expedition in 1911. The Shipley Glacier is very heavily crevassed as it descends to the sea. The west arm of the Shipley Glacier had capped off huge icebergs due to the large crevasses that run across it. At the west arm, we turned around and headed back to the ship. Soon we were flying back to the ship and the end of our final helicopter flight of this voyage. The flight back from the glacier was uneventful, but at least one flight saw a large pod of minke whales in the water. After the flight seeing finished, we witnessed a super pod of 30 minke whales swimming past right in front of the ship. The sound of the pod breathing as it passed by the ship was reminiscent of the sound of a steam engine. This event was the second most amazing sighting on our trip after that of the orca attacking and killing a minke whale. The sun lighting up the Admiralty Mountains provided a wonderful last glimpse of continental Antarctica. Leaving Cape Adare, we bid adieu to continental Antarctica and sailed some 150 kilometers northwest to the uninhabited Baleine Islands.
Of our voyage to the Ross Sea and covers the 8-day leg from Cape Adare, Antarctica to Bluff, New Zealand. Before reaching New Zealand, we visit the Blaney Islands, Campbell Island, and Snares Island. Leaving Cape Adare, we bid adieu to continental Antarctica and sailed northwest to the uninhabited Blaney Islands.
The Blaney Islands were first sighted in 1839 by English whaling captains John Blaney and Thomas Freeman. Freeman was the first person known to have set foot on any land south of the Antarctic Circle. After some 26 hours, we arrived off Sturge Island, which is the most southern island of the group of the Blaney Islands. The group includes 3 main islands, Sturge, Buckle, and Young, which extend for about 160 kilometers in a line from the southeast to the northwest. We stopped for a Zodiac cruise at Sabrina Island, which is just off of Buckle Island. Sabrina Island is the largest of 3 small islets lying a 1.5 kilometers south of Buckle Island. Sabrina was discovered by whaling captain John Blaney in 1839 and was named for Sabrina, the cutter captained by Thomas Freeman during the expedition. The monolith is a group of 2 islets beside Sabrina Island. It rises 110 meters high and is thought to be a volcanic plug. There have been no known ascents of the peak.
After a brief inspection of the north side of Sabrina Island, we ventured across to see the Adelie penguin colony on Chinstrap Island. While the penguins were interesting to watch, the star at Chinstrap Island was the leopard seal that kept popping up to have a look at us, whilst keeping its eye out for any penguin swimming past that it could catch and eat.
Oh, there he is. Out that way now. Right in line with the penguin. Right in line with the penguin. Well, it needs to move somewhere else now, but... Oh, that was quite spectacular. Oh, there he is, right there. He just popped his head up.
Leaving Chinstrap Island behind, we motored back to the south side of Sabrina Island to see its large Adelie penguin colony. It was amazing to see the line of Adelie penguins streaming down the Penguin Highway from the top of the island to the beach, from which they'd be able to swim out into the ocean to search for food.
See, there's a chin strap standing in the middle of all the Adelies there. Right in there.
They must be going down to go feeding and jump in the water.
Especially this volcanic stuff.
Leaving Sabrina Island with its penguins behind, we slalomed through an ice band to return to the ship. As the Blaney Islands extend for about 160 kilometers or 100 miles, we still had to sail past Buckle and Young Islands, which offer more beautiful views of glaciers dipping into the ocean and humpback whales logging on the surface.
The Blaney Islands are heavily glaciated and of volcanic origin. The glaciers descend from their slopes into the sea. Leaving Buckle Island astern, we sailed northwards to Young Island, where we again crossed the Antarctic Circle. From the Baleine Islands, it was a rough 5-day transit across the screaming 60s and the furious 50s to Campbell Island. There is an old sailor saying that below 40 degrees south there is no law, whilst below 50 degrees south there is no God. This gives some idea of the awe and dread these waters have inspired, as these latitudes, known as the Roaring 40s, the Furious 50s, and the Screaming 60s, are subject to incessant and ferocious storms, huge waves, and the ever-present danger of icebergs. It was impressive to watch the crew working on the outside deck in the big seas. It was thrilling to stand at the stern and watch the angry sea. However, unfortunately, the captain banned us from going outside. We arrived off Campbell Island, which was discovered in 1810 by the sealing brig Perseverance, which was owned by the ship owner Robert Campbell, whence the island's name. Our first Zodiac cruise at Campbell Island was off Northeast Harbor. The sea was a bit rough, but nothing that the Zodiacs couldn't safely handle. Unfortunately, no sooner than we had reached the coast, the trip leader on the ship decided that it was too rough, which forced our return to the ship. This meant that most of the passengers didn't have a chance to make the cruise.
The cruise has been cut short, possibly.
It was interesting to see the clouds rolling over the island like a duvet being pulled over a bed. Once everything was back on board, we sailed into the calm waters of Perseverance Harbor, where the trip leader felt more comfortable using the Zodiacs. Entering Perseverance Harbor, it was impressive to watch the large waves exploding on the cliffs whilst albatrosses flew about.
Inside Perseverance Harbor, there was an area where small fish were in abundance near the surface, as gulls, terns, and petrels were in a feeding frenzy. The old meteorological station at Beeman Cove is used for field research in the summer season, and we picked up the staff returning to New Zealand.
For some unexplained reason, the government of New Zealand denied us permission to land and hike the island's boardwalk, so we were restricted to a Zodiac cruise. We were lucky to see the Campbell teal, which is the world's rarest duck. It was reintroduced to Campbell Island following a rat eradication program to kill all the human-introduced rats that ate the teal's chicks. The flora on the island is outstanding and includes the Ranfurly tree supposedly planted in 1901 by Lord Ranfurly, which is called the most lonely tree in the world, as its nearest fellow tree would be over 122 kilometers or 138 miles away on the Auckland Islands. The fur seals up in the vegetation were large, weighing up to 1/5 of a ton, but they were dwarfed by the huge molting elephant seals, which can weigh up to 4 tons. As we were watching the elephant seals, a sea lion decided to re-enter the water and swim out to feed.
Back out in the harbor again, the sea lions watched our Zodiac and appeared to enjoy showing off beside our Zodiac. There were strong winds aloft that caused the clouds to stream past the hillside dotted with albatross nests. The Campbell albatross breeds only on Campbell Island and a nearby islet. With the Zodiacs back on board, we sailed out of Perseverance Harbor under the arch of a rainbow and resumed our voyage northward towards Snares Islands, which lay a day-and-a-half sail away. Sailing through the roaring 40s was windy, but not as much as in the furious 50s. The tracks of the factory trawlers on the ship's chalked plotter showed how heavily this area is fished. Finally, we arrived off Northeast Island in the Snares Islands, where we could see the spectacle of tens of thousands of sooty shearwaters darkening the sky over the island. Unlike Campbell Island, the Snares Islands never had introduced mammals established, hence bird fauna is abundant. The bird fauna is dominated by seabirds, particularly the phenomenally abundant sooty shearwater, which nests in burrows wherever the soil is deep enough. The sooty shearwater population is estimated at 1 to 2 million pairs. Without a special government permit, visitors can't land on the islands, so they can only cruise about them in the Zodiac, keeping the islands free of introduced biohazards like foreign weeds and rats. The islands were named the Snares by Captain George Vancouver when he discovered them in October 1791. Vancouver considered the islands to be a hazard to shipping, hence the warning in the name. We wallowed about in the large swells as we cruised alongside the shoreline. The bull kelp swaying in the waves was very beautiful. Bull kelp can reach lengths of 40 meters or 130 feet and grows at an average rate of 10 centimeters or 4 inches a day. Historically, bull kelp was used for food and to make tools. Without kelp, many marine creatures would be vulnerable to storms, predators, and starvation. Whalers and sealers destroyed most of the fur seal population within a few decades before leaving these rather desolate islands alone for the most part. Before the petroleum industry took off in the 19th century, seals were processed for lamp oil, machine lubricants, as well as their pelts. When seal fur coats became fashionable, the hunting of seals, including fur seals, dramatically reduced the worldwide populations of seals. However, with the end of the demand for seal pelts and oils, populations of seals have started to recover. We stopped at a rock wall that looked almost like a slide, yet the penguins use it daily to get to and from the sea to their colony above. Considering how ungainly the penguins look when they're waddling about on land, it was impressive to see how they can get up onto the rocky, slippery, seaweed-covered cliffs just using their feet alone.
Gaining weight in order to molt.
The most well-known bird species on the island is the Snares crested penguin, and as its name suggests, it breeds only within the Snares Islands, with an estimated 30,000 breeding pairs. The bull kelp lining the shoreline must have made it more of a challenge for the penguins to enter and exit the ocean. Further along the coast, we passed through a short sea tunnel. Exiting the tunnel, we came upon more fur seals comfortably bedded down on the rocks and in the beds of kelp. We were lucky to see some Snares penguins at sea returning to their colony. With water on their head, they looked like they had slicked back their crests. The very rotund penguins on the shoreline showed that feeding was good for the penguins in the waters surrounding the Snares. The Snares penguins' main prey is krill, supplemented by squid and small fish. We entered a small bay surrounded by a forest of beautiful gray-green olearia trees. At the end of the bay was a small hidden beach, entered through a narrow passage. Through the tunnel we could see a large bull fur seal with a commanding presence on the beach. It was quite surprising to see Snares penguins on a steep rock face high up in the olearia forest. They must have followed a very circuitous route to get there, as there was no immediate access to their perch from the ocean. Snares penguins nest in dense colonies under the tree cover of the olearia forests or on coastal rocks. Just off the ship, there was a large southern royal albatross resting on the surface without any regard to our presence. These albatross have an average wingspan of 3 meters or about 10 feet, making it one of the 2 largest species of albatross together with the wandering albatross. At the Snares, we reboarded our ship for the last time, as our next stop would be our final destination of Bluff, New Zealand. From the Snares, we made a slow 18-hour voyage to Bluff so as not to arrive too early. Leaving the Snares, there was a remarkable change in temperature as we returned back to the t-shirt warmth of the austral summer in the higher latitudes. As we neared our final destination of Bluff, New Zealand, we flashed back to the many memorable sights witnessed on this voyage to the Ross Sea. But the 3 major highlights were seeing a pod of orca hunt down a minke whale in the Amundsen Sea, watching the icebreaker Polar Star in action in the Ross Sea, and observing a superpod of minke whales sounding like a steam engine as it passed right in front of the ship. Docking in Bluff, our amazing trip to the Ross Sea was over, and we entered a world changed by COVID-19. There were many Chinese scheduled for the ship's return voyage that couldn't make the trip due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. We had a thorough inspection by New Zealand customs officials as we disembarked the ship and set foot on New Zealand soil. Flying out of New Zealand, we returned to our country that was gripped by a fear of COVID-19 and flailing about as a result.